Good evening and thank you for joining us. I now call to order the regular meeting of the Show Low Planning and Zoning Commission for Tuesday, July 28, 2020. Roll call shows all commissioners present with the exception of Josh Adams, who is excused. And I would like to point out that we do have a new commissioner, which is Commissioner Doug Roberts. Welcome to the commission. Invocation will be done by Commissioner Roberts, followed by the pledge by Director Wilson. If you'd like to join us, please stand.
Dear kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we're grateful, Heavenly Father, for the opportunity we have to live in a land of freedom that presents such wonderful places for us to live. We're grateful that we have been blessed to live in this area, in this state, in this county, in this city. We ask that as we perform our duties here, that we will make good choices and decisions, those that are in the best interest of the city at large. We're grateful, Heavenly Father, for all that we have been blessed with. We ask Thee to bless that we can deal confidently and successfully with COVID, and we hope that it will just stop being as difficult as it is, and that we will see some improvement in the outcomes for the people who've been affected. We ask Thee that Thou will guide us in all that we do. We will choose right from wrong, and that we will be appropriate in our actions. We're grateful, Heavenly Father, for these opportunities, and we ask for these blessings. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. If you'll join me in the pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Moving on, item 5 is old business, which we have none of this evening, so we'll move to new business. New business item 6A is consideration of approval of conditional use permit applications submitted by Smith Bagley, Inc., doing business as Cellular 1 of Northeast Arizona, for a conditional use permit to allow for an 80-foot monopole tower on property located at 1350 South White Mountain Road, that being APN 210-32-012C. This is an item that was tabled at a previous meeting. So do we have a motion to untable this item?
Chairman Bishop, I'll make the motion to untable this item.
Motion by the Vice Chair, second by Commissioner Wilson. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, so this is now untabled. Ms. Steckel-Cotter.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Pardon me, I have a sinus infection, so it's the reason for my stuffed up nose. Smith Bagley, Inc., DBA, Cellular 1 of Northeast Arizona, has submitted a conditional use permit, or CUP, to allow for an 80-foot monopole cell tower located at 1350 South White Mountain Road, that being APN 210-32-012C. The subject property is utilized by Cellular 1 and is zoned C2, which is general commercial. There's an existing telecommunications tower at the location that was disguised as a flagpole. The property is 38,333 square feet in size and is approximately 181 feet deep by 287 feet wide. There's a steep hillside to the rear of the property, and it is adjacent to commercial property on the south side. The applicant proposes to remove the existing flagpole, replace it with a standard flagpole, and place a new 80-foot monopole tower in the southwest corner of the property. The new tower will be set back from the road approximately 159 feet, 20 feet from the rear property line, and 8 feet from the south property line. The applicant indicated the tower is required at this site due to connectivity, equipment requirements, and to fill in gaps in existing coverage. Other locations in the vicinity were considered. However, they were determined to be unfeasible by the applicant. City Code, Section 15169 D14, Visual Corridor Protection states, except for placement on existing structures or towers, no new tower shall be permitted within 200 feet of the edge of the right-of-way for any arterial or collector roadways as identified in the City of Sholo's Transportation Plan. A variance from the Board of Adjustment is needed if this condition cannot be met. In addition, City Code Section 15169 G2D1 states towers must be set back a distance equal to 125% of the tower from any adjoining lot line, but may be reduced by the Commission if the goals of this ordinance would be better served thereby. Based on this requirement, the setback for an 80-foot tower is 100 feet from property lines. Due to the dimensions of the property, it is impossible to place the tower outside of the 200-foot visual corridor protection or meet the 100-foot setbacks. On January 13th, 2020, the Sholo Board of Adjustment voted 5-0 to approve a variance request from City Code Section 15169 D14, reduction of the 200-foot tower setback from the right-of-way with the following conditions. The applicant shall work with city staff and determine any cosmetic changes or camouflage for the tower to blend with the surrounding area, and the flagpole is to remain as a flagpole. According to City Code Section 15169, any new wireless towers require a CUP. City Code Section 5116 FB1A states any antenna which is not attached to a tower may be approved by the Planning and Zoning Director, provided the antenna and or any supporting mechanisms does not extend more than 30 feet above the highest point of the structure. In addition, City Code Section 15169 G2E1 states separation from residentially zoned property shall be a minimum of 200 feet, but may be reduced by the Commission if the goals of this ordinance would be better served thereby. This item was originally on the Planning and Zoning Commission agenda for the regularly scheduled meeting of January 28th, 2020. However, it was tabled in order to give the applicant and a nearby property owner time to discuss issues related to the treatment of the tower in order for it to fit in better with the surrounding area. Since that time, the applicant has agreed to paint the tower a neutral color, and although the frequency emissions are below Federal Communication Commission's FCC guidelines, the applicant has agreed to adjust the antennas in order to reduce the impact of the tower on the neighborhood. Findings of fact. Smith Bagley Inc., DBA Cellular 1 of Northeast Arizona has submitted a CUP to allow for an 80-foot monopole tower located at 1350 South White Mountain Road, that being APN 210320012C. The subject property is utilized by Cellular 1. It is Zone C2, and their existing telecommunication tower at the location that was disguised as a flagpole. The property is 38,333 square feet in size and is approximately 181 feet deep by 287 feet wide. There's a steep hillside to the rear of the property, and it is adjacent to commercial property on the south side. The applicant proposes to remove the existing flagpole, replace it with a standard flagpole, and place a new 80-foot monopole tower in the southwest corner of the property. The new tower will be set back from the roadway approximately 159 feet, 20 feet from the rear of property line, and 8 feet from the south property line. The reason for the placement of the new tower is to increase cellular coverage in the area and add emergency service antennas. Other locations in the vicinity were considered, however, they were determined to be unfeasible by the applicant. City Code Section 15169 D14, Visual Corridor Protection states, except for placement within existing structures or towers, no new tower shall be permitted within 200 feet of the edge of the right-of-way for any arterial or collector roadways as identified in the City of Sholo's Transportation Plan. A variance for the Board of Adjustment is needed if this condition cannot be met. In addition, City Code Section 15169 G2D1 states towers must be set back a distance equal to 125% of the height of the tower from the adjoining lot line, but may be reduced by the Commission if the goals of the ordinance would be served better thereby. Based on the requirement for this, an 80-foot tower is 100 feet from property lines. Due to dimensions of the property, it is impossible to place the tower outside of the 200-foot visual corridor protection or meet the 100-foot setbacks. Further, City Code Section 15:1 G2E1 states, separation from all residentially zoned properties shall be a minimum of 200 feet, but may be reduced by the Commission if the goals of this ordinance would be better served thereby. On January 13th, 2020, the Cellular Board of Adjustment voted 5-0 to approve a variance request from the City Code Section 15:169D14, reduction of the 200-foot tower setback within the right-of-way with the following conditions. The applicant shall work with the city staff and determine any cosmetic changes or camouflage for the tower to blend with the surrounding area, and the flagpole remains as a flagpole. According to Section 15:169, any new wireless tower requires a CUP. According to City Code Section 15:169 FB1A, states any antenna what is not attached to a tower may be approved by the zoning director as an accessory use, provided the antenna and or supporting mechanism does not exceed more than 30 feet above the highest point of the structure. City Code 15:169 G2E1 states, separation from all residentially zoned property shall be a minimum of 200 feet, but may be reduced by the Commission if this ordinance would be better served by. This item was originally scheduled for the Planning and Zoning Commission agenda for the regular scheduled meeting of January 28th, 2020. However, it was tabled in order to give the applicant and nearby property owner times to discuss issues related to the treatment of the tower in order for it to fit better with the surrounding area. Since that time, the applicant has agreed to paint the tower neutral color, and although the frequency emissions are below FCC guidelines, the applicant has agreed to adjust the antennas in order to reduce the impact of the tower on the neighborhood. Current zoning of the property surrounding properties includes, to the north, R115, which is single-family residential, manufactured homes excluded. To the south and east, C2. To the west, R115. The current land uses of the surrounding properties includes to the north, residential, to the south, Meadowview Plaza, to the east, the Meadow, and to the west, residential. Transmittal memos were sent to all affected agencies, and applicable comments received include the building official stated the Monopole cell tower requires a building permit and shall meet all building codes, including footings and wind loads. The property was posted, and letters were sent to all property owners within 300 feet of the subject property. Staff received a phone call from a resident regarding concerns of visual aesthetics of the proposed tower. The variance application submitted by Smith Bagley Inc., DBA Cellular 1 of Northeast Arizona, seeking relief from City Code 15:169D14, visual corridor protection at 1350 South White Mountain Road, that being APN 210-32012C, was approved 5-0 by the Board of Adjustment with a condition that the applicant work with city staff and determine any changes or camouflage for the tower to blend with the surrounding area and the flagpole to remain as a flagpole. After reviewing this zoning ordinance, standards for review, findings of fact, discussions with the applicant, the Planning and Zoning Commission may approve conditional use permit 6020426 submitted by Smith Bagley Inc., DBA Cellular 1 of Northeast Arizona for an 80-foot monopole tower located at 1350 South White Mountain Road, that being APN 210-32012C, subject to the following conditions. 1, all development shall comply with all applicable federal, state, and local requirements, including federal communications and FAA building permit requirements. The antenna shall not exceed 80 feet. The applicant shall work with the city staff to camouflage the tower as a monopine or similar in order to blend with the surrounding area, and a flagpole shall remain as its standard convention flagpole. The tower shall be in substantial conformance with the submitted site plan. No further height extensions are allowed unless approved through future conditional use permits, or the Planning and Zoning Commission may deny conditional use permit 60204-226 submitted by Smith Bagley Inc., DBA Cellular 1 of Northeast Arizona for an 80-foot monopole tower located at 1350 South White Mountain Road, that being APN 210-32012C, and stating the reasons why. Staff as well as the applicant are available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sexcouter. And that was a marathon reading compared to some others, so thank you for that. Okay, commission members, do we have any questions for staff on this item?
I have a question.
Mr. Adams?
I noticed your recommendations is to camouflage. They're saying they'll paint it. And so explain to me, if we approve it, that means they'll have to camouflage it. Can you go into detail on that?
So the staff recommendation is that they will camouflage the tower as a monopine or a similar. So it does not give the ability to just come in and paint it different colors or do things like that, unless the commission changes that recommendation. The staff recommendation would be, if approved, that it be camouflaged as a monopine or similar type. We don't want to say that it has to be a monopine. There may be another tree type that might fit in better with the area. I'm not sure what that would be, which is why we specifically stated the monopine. But I also recognize that I'm not an expert on everything, and this is one of those fields that, if they came to me with a proposal that said, look, this is what we want it to look like, and it happened to be a different tree than a pine tree, but it's going to fit in with the area, then, our recommendation would be that they have a little bit of flexibility to do that.
Does that answer your question, Commissioner Adams?
Yes. Thank you.
Vice Chair?
So the flagpole, they're saying they will replace it with a standard flagpole. Previously, they had a very large flag that flew there that was, it was giant sized. Are they downsizing that flagpole and making it, or is there any parameter of size of the flagpole?
So the issue of the flagpole came up with the Board of Adjustment, in which they agreed to grant the request to reduce the setback off of White Mountain Road. Typically, that would be a minimum of 200 feet. As you heard during the findings of fact, this property is not even 200 feet deep. So the Board of Adjustment did vote to approve the reduction in the setback, understanding that it still had to come to the commission for approval on everything else. The flagpole itself, they said that they wanted a flagpole to remain on the property. The word standard dimensions were inserted by staff because the flagpole that's there is quite large in diameter.
Yeah.
Because it was specifically put there to camouflage a cell phone antenna. Our recommendation is that they remove that large diameter flagpole, replace it with the standard diameter flagpole of approximately the same height. If it's a couple feet taller, if it's a couple feet shorter, I don't think anybody's got an issue with that. Understanding we don't want them to come in with a 100-foot tall flagpole. At the same time, a 20-footer is probably not going to cut it either. It needs to be similar height to the one that's there, just more of a standard diameter flagpole versus what's there.
And what's that do to the flag size? That's what I'm curious about.
The flag size really is determined by the height of the pole.
Okay.
And so, a similar height pole should be able to carry a similar type flag. Understanding that the flag may end up being just a tiny bit smaller just because of wind load requirements. But again, I think the idea is that, pretty close to what you had is going to be pretty close to what you're going to have coming, other than it's just not going to be that large diameter pole right along the right of way.
Okay. Commissioner Wilson?
Mine's kind of a two-part question. So it's an 80-foot tower, and does that count that 80 feet? Is it from ground level, or is it going up on side of the hill where it now extends it higher than 80 feet? And if so, is it in violation of the city code 15116 FB1A about not extending more than 30 feet above the structure?
Okay, so the slide that you have in front of you right now, that shows the proposed tower that they are planning. That is 80 feet from the ground where it would be sitting, not from the adjacent property. So you could take the bolts that are holding it on the ground, you could pull a tape 80 feet up in the air and you'd be at the top of the pole. The reason that we put the wording in that you see about the 30 feet, we're really dealing with two different scenarios there. A freestanding monopole is not covered by the other section of code that says you can extend 30 feet above a building. A freestanding monopole is its own animal and falls under its own section of code. The reason that we put that other reference in is just so that the commission would be aware that, you know, anybody, and the hospital has done this already, if you've got an existing structure and you need to mount some type of a telecommunications antenna on top of that structure, by city code as a permitted use, you can go up to 30 feet taller than what that structure is. So if you actually look to the property directly to the south, the Meadowview Plaza, you'll see that there are some antennas already mounted on top of that building, just kind of those small micro dish type. That's what they fell under at the time, was we're going to attach an antenna to an existing building, which is a permitted use. In this case, because it's a freestanding tower and it's more than 30 feet taller than the building, it has to come to the commission for a conditional use permit.
Okay. And my other question was security fencing, if there was any type of security fencing that's required to have a pole like that.
We typically don't require it. However, the applicant or the owner of the pole, they generally want it just from a security standpoint. Because it's at the rear of the building, security fencing from our standpoint would not be an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bess and
Yes,
then Roberts.
Chairman Bishop, thank you. On the tower setback, it says that it's the 125% of the tower height. We're looking at reducing that 100 foot down to 20, which is an 80% reduction in that setback, which would allow that tower, if it did fall onto adjacent property, is a 80% reduction. The commissioner have that much authority to reduce it by 80%?
There are no limits to that reduction by code. There's nothing in code that says you can reduce it up to a maximum of 50%, for example. All it says is that the setback is 125% of the height of the tower, but may be reduced by the commission if you guys feel that the terms of the code would be better satisfied. So as an example, in this scenario, they have said, we want to push this antenna, this tower, as far back as we can. We're going to put it behind our building. And we also have a pretty significant slope behind us where nobody's going to be able to build. The commission may find that, you know what, that is a better situation to move that back behind the building than it is to have it out in front of the building. And so in that case, the commission may say, yeah, it is worthwhile, and it's going to be actually less of an impact if it gets moved closer to the property line than if we make it be farther from the property line. That's the intent of that condition in the code.
Thank you.
Commissioner Roberts.
I have a two-part question. Do we know the difference in elevation between where the flagpole is based and where this new monopole will be based?
The difference in elevation is essentially negligible. The base elevation where the tower is proposed to be located is approximately 6,360 foot in elevation. That site's pretty level, so there may be a couple foot difference, but again, it's going to be pretty negligible.
And the second part of my question is some installations of the monopoles, there has been concern about the security fencing that you were discussing, the appearance of that, but this is behind a building. So will that security fencing be visible from the street to the point where we would want to require it to have like a block wall instead of a chain link fence or anything like that? Or is it acceptable visually with the plan that the applicants put forth so far?
It's essentially blocked from view from the roadway, either by the building on the property or the building directly to the south. Because of the depth of the property, the location, that fencing is really not going to be visible from the roadway.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Have any questions for the applicant? No? Yes,
I'm
Commissioner
sorry,
Wilson.
I think I do. Is there any issue with the electromagnetic waves interfering with anything, having an 80-foot pole?
Is that for staff or the applicant?
If staff can answer it.
I'm not aware of any. The emissions that will be coming from this are less than what the FCC dictates as a maximum level. Based on that, again, I'm not aware of anything that the FCC would say is a problem because of these.
Comment on that in the report, it mentions that they're going to be pointing this in a certain direction to try to minimize the interference with the homes nearby. Is that correct?
So you'll notice in the findings of fact, this was tabled to allow for discussions between the applicant and the adjacent neighbor. That adjacent neighbor is here this evening. I believe he's going to want to address the commission at whatever moment the chairman deems appropriate. One of the concerns that they had was the emissions of the antennas and the patterns for those emissions coming off of that. The applicant has indicated and information was provided to that neighbor showing that they would align those antennas in such a way as to lessen the emissions, again, as much as possible. I can't sit here and tell you that they're going to be 0% emissions, but the applicant has said that, yeah, we're going to go ahead and point these, in a direction that, again, as much as possible is going to reduce those emissions outside of the roadway that's there. Again, FCC is really what governs these requirements, and these emissions would be less than what the FCC deems as the maximum allowable. So,
Thank you.
Vice Chair.
Another question for the applicant.
So the applicant, is that Mr. Baker, or?
Yes.
Would you please approach the podium, state your name and address, and then the Vice Chair has a question for you.
My name is Dennis Baker, 3270 Viking Trail in Pine Top, Arizona.
Thank you for your time today. My question is gain. What are you going to gain by this? Obviously, there's going to be an increase in service coverage, and is that going to be data and cellular as well?
What it does is it allows us to move into 3G, 4G, 5G types of speeds. It gives us that flexibility. When we did the flagpole, antennas were small, narrow, shorter. As we move into new technologies and it brings it up, antennas are now 6, 8, 10 feet tall, wider, because they're doing multiple stuff within that antenna. So that's one thing that it does. It really doesn't give us more coverage, because we're still covering the same things. What it does is allows us to do the upgraded services and the newer services in that area. The second thing that allows us to do is, and if you've heard of it, FirstNet, AT&T, the national project for EMS, where emergency services will have their own basically network nationwide. We have been contracted with FirstNet, with AT&T, to do a bunch of sites within this market, within our market, Apache Navajo County and into New Mexico and around. This site is on the FirstNet list. This is a site that will allow us to put a co-locator onto it basically and allow that services to be done where we couldn't in the flagpole. We looked at it. We would have had to extend the flagpole, I want to say 15 foot, and then take that circumference, which was already big that we were talking about, and almost double it from that last 15 foot. And so it just didn't, there's no way that would look, you couldn't put a flag on it. You couldn't do all kinds of stuff at that site once you've done that. So that's where we came back and looked at moving it as close as we can. That's where our switch is, where everything comes through. And then we bring the majority of a big portion of the Navajo Nation off of that site into the Ellsworth, over by the radio stations, and then we can still see that with a line of sight. And that's where we talk about, we've exhausted a lot, looked at a lot of different places, and nothing's feasible because if you look straight, we're going right up Shoal Creek, right into that site at Ellsworth, because we're all limited with fiber up here.
And then the other question I have is that'll just be a Cellular One tower you won't be leasing, or will you be able to lease other service providers on it?
No, all of our towers are co-locatable. We'll build it as at least a 3 carrier, probably a 4 carrier. It'll depend on cost at that point and what we can do. We try to build everything as a 3 or 4 carrier. And then, like I say, in our geographics, we have to rely on microwave for backhaul and speeds and hooking systems up. Now, this site sits right next to our switch, so it will be fiber right to the site there. But it also brings in its connectivity into that little bowl coming outside from basically up north.
But the other side service provider could also co-locate. That would, because that's pretty much a dead zone for Verizon, I'll say.
FirstNet is a co-location.
Okay.
They are, we're building it for them. We've contracted that side of it, but they'll be a customer as a tenant of ours on that. And then part of our contract with AT&T is we'll service their sites, and we're building about just under 150 of their sites in our market.
Thank you.
Commissioner Best, did you have a question?
Yes, I did, Chairman Bishop, but Vice Chairman Hebner asked that question about the co-location on the pole.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Roberts?
My only, along these same lines, my question is, do you anticipate that you'll be having discussions to actually have those carriers co-contracted with you on that pole?
Again, I can't dictate a business decision for a Verizon. I can offer it, we can show them that we have it, but it comes to a business decision. Whether they want to build it on there or they don't want to build it on there, it's up to them. It's hard to say, it's hard to speak for them on what they look at in their marketing, but they're also doing it nationwide. So is it in the next 6 months, or is it in the next 6 years that they deem it, or it falls within their business plan to spend? Cell sites are expensive, and with what we're seeing, your electronics are about $500,000. So you have to judge that into it. So I will build it. We will we'll reach out as much as we can to them, and offer it. And if we would not accept their application to go on that site.
Thank you.
Commissioner Adams?
And my question is more along of the looks and the metal. The metal is something we take a lot of pride in, and some that we look and see all the time, and some of us have grown up here and seen it the way it is all of our lives. So it means a lot to us. So my concern is how close you work with the city and in camouflaging that. I mean, not just painting it in the tree or wherever the case may be. I wanted to know how closely you'll work with the city on that, if that's.
We've worked with the city. I mean, I've been up here. I grew up here, so I understand that. I'm not from the valley. I'm not. We're a local company. We've worked with the city for a long time. I've worked with the city on multiple projects. I've been with the company for almost 20 years now. I don't have a problem working with it. We're to this point into where it's at now because we've worked with the city. We've exhausted everything. We tried to push it back in as far back as we can, so it didn't visually affect that. You don't see it. Well, you don't see the majority of it until you're right past the buildings and basically the size of the parking lot from the flagpole to the end of the parking lot as you're driving, and it's as far back away from the meadow as we can get it in anything. But yes, we would work with the city with whatever the commission comes up with.
And more of a statement than anything, I think a giant flag there would be very well appreciated and might actually distract from anybody seeing the tower.
Again, the issue there is I have limitations on what I can't do because we were going to remove it, is what we were going to do, because we figured that was the easiest thing to do, remove it. The landlord is actually, we don't own the property, so the landlord has requested that we do the flagpole. But again, you're going to be limited to what flagpole I put up, to what size flag you can put on it, in height and whatever it might be. So we'll work with whatever, I don't know if it's a 40-foot or 60-foot. I don't know what it is now. At the time, it was 60-foot that you had to work with flagpoles. So we'll look at whatever we can.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, Mr. Baker.
Thank you.
Are there any members of the public that would like to comment or have any questions about this item? Mr. Furneaux, would you come up and state your name and address for the record?
Thank you, Chairman, Vice Chairman, rest of the commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to speak and address the commission. And I appreciate staff giving us the opportunity to sit down with the applicant. I have some additional information that I'd like to give staff to give. And I appreciate the question that Commissioner Wilson brought up about electromagnetic fields, because that is a concern. And you are correct that the current FCC guidelines at this current time the requirements are a lot higher than many other countries. The guidelines were set many, many years ago when cell phones were a very little industry. And I just want to say that I've been an actual Cellular One customer since 1992 when they first entered this market. They've been great to our community. It's one of the bigger companies that has given back time and time again to our local area. And I've got to say, if you consider that area a dead zone signal-wise, then you need to leave Verizon and go to Cellular One, for one, okay? So I'll say that. You get a lot of complaints of signal, and you don't hear that much from Cellular One. So great company to work with. They respond well to local needs. And during the Rodeo Chetasky fire, they were instrumental in providing communications to the firefighters, all the frontline people. If it hadn't been for Cellular One, I think they would have lost communications many times over. So I commend them for that. However, all that being said, I'm concerned, once again, because of the studies that other countries have done. They're taking another look at electromagnetic radiation. And it's different coming from, like, let's say, ham radio operators who the only time power is emitted is during transmission, during voice transmission. With cellular, that signal is there 24/7. And my original letter to the commission, which I'm hoping you all have a copy of, my original position was that they needed to make sure that measures were taken to prevent unwanted radiation patterns. And that's difficult to do, but technology's there to do that. To ensure only the minimum required power is used to accomplish the task, and minimum side and backload radiation. Antennas, as you know, can be very directional, or they can be omnidirectional. And in this particular case, these are somewhat directional antennas. Mr. Baker mentioned that the signal was going to be pointed down the creek. It's pretty hard to pinpoint some of these signals. Microwave signals can, but from these antennas, it's pretty hard to really focus unless you spend a lot of extra money and a lot of extra engineering to make sure that that doesn't happen. I noticed in the city permit application, item 3, it says no adverse impact. And I would beg to differ with that. I think there is adverse impact. I'm concerned about property value as well. I've been at the location where I'm at right now for 20 years, and I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that for the record. Rick Furneaux, 1331 East Meadowview Place in Show Low, and I've been at that location going on 21 years. I'm concerned about property value decrease. I don't know what the power levels are going to be. I'd like to know what protections are afforded the employees of Cellular One who are going to be much closer than I am. He also mentioned that additional companies are going to be added to the poll. My concern there is, does that come back to the commission? Do power levels get determined by the commission, or is it just whatever the company is allowed to do? I have a real concern there. I do appreciate the effort to beautify the corridor. That's something that I have been personally involved in for many years, to get the power lines down, to beautify the meadow, to preserve the barn. So that meadow means something to me. I look at it every day, multiple times a day. I live it. So it definitely is very important to me. Another concern I have, my wife says we're putting the house up for sale if the antenna goes up. So I'm real concerned of having to move. I've been married to her for almost 53 years, and I take her at her word. It's something that would happen. I would really love to see, when they talk about all reasonable attempts were made to locate this somewhere else. I realize that it's feasible to be right there next to the facility, and I appreciate that. It's hard for me to believe that the use or configuration of that antenna couldn't be placed somewhere else where, number one, they didn't have to camouflage it. It'd be further away from residential properties, because I'm not the only one that it's going to affect. So those are just some of the things that I wanted to bring to the commission's attention. It's a difficult decision because it's something that will improve the signal, but I truly believe there's going to be another location or locations that would more adequately serve the community and not be an issue. Definitely not a health issue. I'm real concerned. As you will read on the last page of what I handed out, it mentions, to date, Sweden and Germany recognize electromagnetic hypersensitivity as an actual medical condition, and I expect that to grow in the coming years. So it was an infant industry when the FCC originally put out the requirements and conditions. It's no longer an infant industry. We're going to see many, many more towers go up, and I appreciate the commission asking the tough questions, because it's not an easy decision. Like I said, I respect what Cellular One is trying to do. I think it's a great company. They take care of their employees. They've done a lot for our community, but I'm hoping we can find another location for this. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Furneaux made indication towards a letter that he had written back in January. That was not included in your packet. I can read that into the record now at this time if you would like. It's one of those things when we do the packets, what do we include, what do we not? And unfortunately, in this case, we did not include the letter because we anticipated Mr. Furneaux would be here to represent, and therefore the letter would be redundant. However, since he did make reference to it, I certainly can read that in if you would like that.
Please.
Okay. It's dated 28th of January, 2020. It says, Dear Mr. Tregaskis, reference Cellular One monopole antenna request in the visual corridor. I want to make sure that my wife and I, along with our neighbors, are given ample input as to the construction and design of the proposed tower. For many years, tower companies have used camouflage systems successfully. While I understand that the initial cost is more and maintenance issues become harder, the city and Main Street have tirelessly endeavored to make our mountain more beautiful on many fronts, especially in our visual corridors. The few that come to mind are the removal of billboards in our city, the underground power and utility efforts, especially in the Sholo Meadow, the purchase of the Sholo Meadow, the deuce of clubs in the old downtown area, and the facade on the walking bridge in the Sholo Meadow. I would also like to see Cellular One reinstall the U.S. flags on the two existing flagpole towers located on South White Mountain Road and on Sholo Lake Road next to Summit Healthcare. My understanding is that the flags were to be flown and maintained until such time that the towers would be removed. I'm asking you to read this into the record, as my wife and I will not be able to attend tonight's meeting. We are hopeful that you and Cellular One will schedule a meeting to meet with us in the very near future to discuss the many options that are available to reduce the visibility of the proposed tower. Respectfully, Rick Furneaux, Sholo resident.
Thank you. Were there any other members of the public that had questions or wanted to comment on this item?
I did have an additional letter dated February 12th.
Was that in your file? Mr. Furneaux, you have a copy of that letter?
Yeah, I do not have that in this file. Okay. Dated February 12th, note says sent 2/13 of 20. Dear Justin, thank you for setting up the meeting between myself and Cellular One. Over the past few weeks, I've been looking at multiple articles and studies on electromagnetic fields, and my findings thus far are more than disturbing. In addition to the many health issues associated with EMFs, recent studies show that there is more than enough data to support a hold on any new tower construction in close proximity to populated areas unless measures are taken to prevent unwanted radiation pattern and ensure that only the minimum required power is used with minimum side and back lobe radiation. What I am asking for is that Cellular One provide the city and ultimately me the most current data on the proposed antenna design, frequency, RF power, ERP, which is effective radiated power, and radiation patterns, especially as relates to the homes on Meadowview Place, properties immediately adjacent to the proposed antenna site, and all the employees working for Cellular One. I've attached antenna radiation patterns describing main, back, and side lobes, along with an example of excessive side and back lobe radiation. In addition to the above, my understanding is that the monopole tower and attached antennas will incorporate the latest camouflage techniques, as this proposed tower will very obviously be in our visual corridor. Sincerely, Rick Furneaux. And then there were several enclosures that were included with that. I would indicate that there was communication with Cellular One and myself, that information was passed to Mr. Furneaux regarding frequencies, the types of antennas, the patterns of emissions that did come from those antennas. So that was forwarded to Mr. Furneaux as part of this process. Rick, I can have this for the file? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Tregaskis. Back to the commission. Do we have more questions for staff, the applicant, or Mr. Furneaux?
I have a question for the applicant.
Commissioner Adams has a question. Mr. Baker?
Mr. Furneaux brought up a real good point. I was wondering if there is other companies brought online with this tower. Does that increase that magnetic, whatever, I don't know the term of it.
Can I defer? I've got my RF engineer with us. You know, you're going to put more frequency in the air. Yes. What change? They're all going to be licensed. They're all going to be under the FCC guidelines. Are all going to be under that. You know, but I can't. You know, I'll let Mark answer that. I think he can say it a lot better than I can.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, would you please state your name and address for the record?
Sure will. Hi, Mark Lane, 2633 Lakeview Drive in Pine.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And just to answer your question, yes, they will be transmitting at their own frequencies, and different from our frequencies, of course. Those can add in the air, but typically, as the FCC guidelines permit or state, anything above 33 feet above the ground is what they call categorically excluded from any kind of issues that might arise from electromagnetic radiation, as they call it, right? But don't confuse that with radioactivity, please. But it's not. It's just energy radiating forth from an antenna. To answer your question, yes, it would, but whether they aggregate in the air or not become more of a danger, I don't believe so.
Commissioner Wilson, do you have a question?
I do actually for Mr. Furnell. I just wondered, like,
Go ahead.
sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, you did not.
I was just wondering where your home was in respect to the location of the tower.
I think Director Turgaskis can highlight on the overhead.
Yeah.
So in response to Commissioner Wilson's question, I am circling on the overhead where the Furneaux's home is. I did do a measurement just based on the aerial from the proposed location of this tower to the Furneaux's home. And that number based on the aerial is approximately 700 feet plus or minus.
And the elevation difference?
Elevation difference, again, the base elevation of the proposed tower is 6,360. Based on the topo that we have available, the ground level of the Furneaux's home, and those of you familiar with the Furneaux's home, you know, it's on the side facing east. It's 2 levels, right? You've got a walkout workshop garage on the bottom,
Yeah.
elevated deck on the top.
Yes.
I don't know the elevation of the deck, but the elevation of the ground there at the Furneaux's home is approximately 6,420. So about a 60-foot difference between the two.
Okay.
The tower, base elevation of the tower is 60 foot lower than the base elevation of the Furneaux's home.
Okay, plus 80 feet above that.
Plus 80 feet, plus whatever Rick and Kim's home is above the ground.
Okay,
16 feet.
Okay.
but 700
700 as the crow flies, yes.
yards?
Feet,
Feet, okay.
yes.
Commissioner Roberts. Do you have a
Having
question for it?
been a guest at Mr. Furneaux's home and been on that deck, I can tell you that the view from there is gorgeous. I don't remember noticing the Cell 1 flag from that deck. Mostly we were paying attention to the meadow because that was all pretty out there. Looking at the 700-foot difference between his property and where the Cell 1 property is located, are there trees that block that view a little bit, Mr. Furneaux?
A little bit. With the 80-foot height of the antenna and the elevation of my house, it's a, you know, there's not much difference in elevation between the signal and my living area, if you will.
I remember the gorgeous view of the meadow. That was fantastic. So.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I do have on the overhead a picture provided by the applicant. This is an illustration showing the proposed tower without any treatment. And this was taken from the hillside behind the home, or not behind the home, behind Cellular 1. You can see their offices here. Again, this is not from the Furneaux's home. This is not from their porch. This is from the hill directly west of the property. But it does give you a little bit of an example of, you know, how that does stick up there with the hillside and some of the trees. So.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant or staff? I do have a question for the applicant, Dennis, if you wouldn't mind coming back up. Maybe both. So thank you again. I know you've taken a couple journeys up to the podium. So 2 questions, and it really addresses what Mr. Furneaux has stated as far as concerns. Maybe the easier one first with the visual aspect of this. We know that there's going to be some sort of pine tree looking or some sort of tree looking tower. A lot of times when you do those sorts of things and you have the engineering documents, they sometimes draw that out as far as a visual look. This is more of a tower look, but do you have any sort of ideas specifically on what your intention is with that type of tower and what it's going to look like?
No idea at this
Okay.
point. It'd be something we'd have to go to because it all depended on how we came out of with the commission side. As was stated, we wanted to paint it as a camouflage. If it's going to be approved as a recommendation as a monopine a tree, some type of camouflage that way, then I'll have to go to the drawing boards. We've never built one. So I have no idea.
There's no drafts for the
Not
plans for
that I know of.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure there is once I start that process, but we haven't started the process yet. We needed to get through this process first, and then I will look at through the tower companies what is available and what fits our need with what we're trying to do. With making it a multiple carrier type of site.
Thank you. And then my other question was back to the frequencies. And years ago, I was actually responsible for communication towers and microwave dishes for my employer. I'm not an expert by any means, especially the health effects on these things. But when we've looked into it and what we were told by partners and the FCC is we were told that there were no significant adverse long-term health effects. But of course, technologies have changed, the frequencies have changed and things of that nature. Could you just kind of give a summary of what the latest science is on some of this stuff? Is there validity to the health concerns, or is it something that is maybe just misguided as far as some of the documentation out there?
Chairman, thank you. To this point, there are no studies that prove adverse health impact. There's OET Bulletin 65 released by the Federal Communications Commission that gives very good overview of situations. I know there's been quite a bit of studies. There have been studies ranging from subjecting rats to super high power of frequencies. There have been other studies that have been long-term health effects, and they have come back inconclusive, to my knowledge. And again, I am, just like you, not at all an expert on the health impacts. I'm just an engineer, 26 years in the industry of doing that. But through that time, I have not seen anything that scares me from my children having, walking out in the street and being bombarded by radio electric waves.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
All right, so back to the commission. We've heard a lot tonight from staff, the applicant, and also from Mr. Furneaux. Would the commission like to take action? I know that staff has presented us with motions to approve or deny, but I think another option would be as if there was additional time needed or some studying to be done, we could potentially table this item if we needed to. Is that correct?
So with a conditional use permit, the reason we tabled the item before was because we didn't know how long it was going to take to bring it back to you guys. That meeting was in January. We're here at the end of July. So, it took us a number of months to get there. In between, we've had an international pandemic. There's been a few things that beyond our control as to why it took a little bit longer than I think anybody anticipated. By code, you can continue. So there's a difference between table and continue. You can continue a conditional use permit one time for up to 30 days. But that would be, you would need to have a specific reason why you were continuing it. From staff level, we would want to know what is it that you're expecting from us so that we can bring that information back to you within that 30 days. You only have the option to continue at one time. So if we bring it back and now somebody presents new information that none of us were aware of before, we've already continued at the one time. So there are limitations on that, but it is an option for you if you feel that you don't have enough information tonight to make a decision.
Thank you.
Could I ask
Mr.
you?
Roberts, or Commissioner Roberts.
I'm sorry. Mr. Gassis, can we approve on the condition that the design of the tower is acceptable to the staff? Because we don't know what that's going to be at this.
So the way that the proposed condition reads says that the applicant shall work with city staff to camouflage as a monopine or similar. And again, like I said before, we use the term monopine. That's usually the most common. But what if they come and they say, we've got a really nice looking spruce tree, and I don't want to say, well, gee, it has to be a monopine and it can't be a spruce because we use the term monopine. So that's why we put in a little bit of flexibility there. But the intent would be that they come to staff with some sort of a camouflage to make it look like a tree that would belong in the area.
What is our recourse if they cannot come up with an acceptable design?
Then they do not meet the conditions of the conditional use permit, and I can't issue them a permit to build it.
Thank you.
Vice Chair.
How many homes are in that approximate same area as Mr. Furneaux?
I'll go back to the large scale aerial that we have. I don't know a number off the top of my head, but we can probably count them up pretty quick.
4, 5, 6, something like that.
There is a home located directly north of the property, right there along White Mountain Road. So that would be one. And then up here on Meadowview Place, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, approximately 13, 14 homes on Meadowview. So
And
less than 20.
Have they given any comment back?
The only people that we have heard comments from are the Furneaux and also from the Schneffs, who are the home directly here. They came back in January or so and just asked questions. We have not heard from anybody other than what we heard tonight since we mailed out the letters and posted the property 10 days ago.
Mrs. Furneaux, could you come to the podium just so we can hear you? If you want to, just for the record, state your name and address.
Hi, I'm Kim Furneaux, 1331 East Meadowview Place. The rest of our neighbors, we didn't find out until today, did not receive the letters. It's because of the 300-foot thing, I guess, and they must have just missed it.
Right. So the 300-foot distance, again, this is measurements that I've taken off this aerial, from this corner of the property to the Furneaux's property, which is this property right here, is 286 feet. So anybody to the west of the Furneaux's would have been outside of that 300 foot. Anybody to the north of the Furneaux's would have been outside that 300 foot. That's one of the reasons why, in addition to sending out the letters, we post the property so that anybody who's driving by can see that there's a sign there. If they feel so inclined, they can stop and see, what it is that's going on. But yeah, the other neighbors are just outside that 300-foot notification. For the commission, who was on the commission back at the time, you'll remember when we were doing another conditional use permit, we had somebody who came and said, hey, I didn't get a letter. What's the deal? They were actually 303 feet, I think, outside of the boundary. The requirement is everyone within 300, and so that's where we send the letters to. So if your neighbor didn't get a letter, it's because they're outside the 300.
Right, and I understand that's the law, but sadly, we didn't realize that till late this afternoon when we asked a couple. And if you'll have time to read the studies that Germany and Israel have done, if you're within a quarter mile of one of these, your cancer rate goes up 3 times. And it starts as early as 1 year after they've been installed. And I don't know why, but our little streets had a baby boom lately. And I know your house is fertile. And the babies and the young people are the ones that get it first and the worst. So if they're worried about money, I think they better save money in their coffers for lawsuits, because I really don't mean that in a mean way. I just think that's what's going to happen. It's not safe for neighborhoods. So thank you.
Mrs. Furnell.
And I really don't care about the looks so much, but the health of the people I do.
So
And the Cellular One employees, you guys. They'll be bombing you all the time.
I've been involved in the mobile. I've been involved in the mobile electronics industry since 1986. When the consumer electronics industry, with cell phones, with mobile electronics, and all of this, and not aware of any study that's ever shown with electromagnetics anything adversely, as they had stated before. There's a lot of anecdotal stories. There's a lot of proposed studies, but there's no actual peer-reviewed clinical study or proof. And they did this back with cell phones when they first came out, that you were holding them next to your head. And if you look at the radiation levels of a Wi-Fi in your home, which you probably have and are around all the time, it's going to be much higher than what you're going to get out of this cell phone tower.
I think there's different radiation levels depending on the actual device versus the transmitting tower. So there's some difference there, but the frequencies are different. So there's been some changes, and I don't know what the latest science is on it, honestly. Commissioner Wilson?
Well, I was just wondering, we have a flagpole there with radio antennas already. What is the difference in the frequency with the new antenna? The new pole antenna coming up. I mean, is it a big difference? For the applicant, I guess. I can still ask them, or?
Sure.
Basically the same.
You're going to get your steps in. You should wear your Fitbit.
Fitbits are really bad for you.
I guess the power level of what's being emitted.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Commissioner. Yes, we will be adding more spectrum to it. Right now we have 1900 megahertz LTE. We have 1900 megahertz. We have 850 megahertz 2G and 3G technologies as well. We're looking to add some 700 megahertz LTE to it as well, and possibly some 600 megahertz in the future. So we will be adding more spectrum to it. But again, these are all kind of compartmentalized, and if I can say that, to its own spectrum. And just like Vice Chairman Hefner was saying, there are no known studies of any long-term health impacts from cellular towers. Electromagnetic radiation is non-ionizing radiation. Many people squabble over that. It doesn't have the enough power, if you will, to remove electrons from orbit within your body and that kind of thing. But I'm not an expert, so I shouldn't be commenting on that. But we will be adding more frequencies to improve our service. Hopefully provide faster LTE service to our customers. Look toward our 5G offerings in the future as well. The world is ever changing, very much so ever changing in how we use our phones. I started in the industry in 1994, back with the 1G, and it was a very different environment back then. You used your phone for calling people to be accessible, and even then you weren't very accessible because the coverage was terrible. But now we're looking to improve our service substantially. We also provide roaming service for tier 1 operators, T-Mobile and AT&T. So we're hoping to improve service for them as well, and definitely to keep our service strong for our own customers as roaming customers come in from the valley, et cetera, in the summer months. So adding more spectrum will add more capacity and will not cause further health issues.
Did that answer your question, Commissioner Wilson?
Hope so.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Can I add just a little bit there?
Sure.
That other site's been up since, let's say, between 2007 and 2009, I think.
Some longer than that.
Has it been that long? Holy crap. Okay, before 2007, so for 10 to 15 years, basically, if you're talking a frequency pattern in the same type of pattern that we're going to do, moving back, but it's still picking up the same traffic pattern that we're looking at. So it's replacing a site. So it's not like it's adding, something that hasn't been there. So it has been there since 2000 and what do you think, 5?
Probably pretty close to that.
So
Thank you for
over
the
15
clarification.
years.
So back to the commission. Mr. Furneaux, did you want to add a comment?
As I mentioned in one of my letters, if the commission could add a condition that, once again, the minimum amount of power required to accomplish what they're trying to do, is what I'm asking for, instead of just throwing a 100 watt or 150 watt amplifier that's just broadcasting all the time. It might only be 20 watts would accomplish that. So I would ask that, once again, the polarization of the antenna, that means that the directivity of the antenna, be minimized to minimize the effect on the residential areas and the Cellular One customer or employees, and only the minimum amount of power. Once again, when we mentioned the studies that were done, the frequencies are different. Cellular is totally different than it was when it began back in the 80s. It has changed considerably. A lot more power, a lot more signal, and it's there all the time. So, just if you could add those conditions, the antenna, the direction of the signal, and the amount of power. I wouldn't want to see these other antennas added and let's just throw this power out there. You don't need all that power.
Thank you, Mr. Furneaux.
Ask that those conditions, a couple of those conditions be put on in the planning and zoning's recommendation or conditions, findings of fact or whatever. Minimize the power and the directivity of the antennas.
Thank you. So,
Would you say to keep it as safe as possible? Would that cover that based upon staff recommendations?
So again, the recommendations by staff, if the commission chooses to approve this, would be that all development comply with all applicable federal, state, and local requirements, including FCC, FAA, and building permit requirements. The antenna shall not exceed 80 feet. The applicant shall work with city staff to camouflage the tower as a monopine or similar in order to blend in with the surrounding area, and the flagpole shall remain as a standard dimension flagpole, and the tower shall be in substantial conformance with the submitted site plan. No further height extensions are allowed unless approved through future conditional use permits. So those are the 4 conditions that staff recommended that, should the commission choose to approve this, that you may want to incorporate. Mr. Furneaux has requested an additional 2 conditions, that the minimum amount of power necessary, and also that the polarization directivity be minimized on the adjacent properties. I believe I'm getting an affirmative nod. So those are the 4 staff recommendations plus the 2 that were requested by Mr. Furneaux.
I just think that's going to be hard to enforce.
Yeah, I don't even understand how you would
limit, that was defined, because that's going to be subject to how they interpret it. So
Right.
I don't think that's feasible.
I appreciate that. From a staff perspective, again, I don't know how I would say that, level 5 is acceptable, but level 6 is not. I don't know how I do that.
If it's the minimum to meet their objective, they're going to determine what the minimum is. So it's sort of a caveat emptor. It's
what I understand just from a legal standpoint is that the FCC has established minimum requirements or maximum requirements. And that as long as they are below those maximum levels, that we cannot dictate to them that you have to be even less than that. Mr. Brown and I were in on a webinar this previous week. It was about an hour and a half that discussed specifically cell towers, impacts, and that type of thing. And that was one of the things that was brought forth by a pretty prominent national attorney that's all he specializes in, is that the FCC requirements, as they are, and for what it's worth, that those are the limits that we have to go by. And if they're below that, then I can't sit here and say you're in violation of a city requirement. That's a federal requirement, and as long as they're in compliance with that, I really don't have any room to say anything else.
I'll make a motion.
Would you like to make a motion? Sure. Vice Chair Hefner would like to make a motion.
I move to approve CUP 602-04226 submitted by Smith Bagley Inc., DBA Cellular One of Northeast Arizona to allow for an 80-foot monopole cell tower located at 1350 South White Mountain Road, that being APN 210-32-012C, subject to staff recommendation.
We have a second. I will second it. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, if I could, during the course of the discussion, I believe that the applicant did stipulate that they would align the antennas in such a way as to reduce any potential impacts. As a stipulation by the applicant, that could be added by the commission as a condition of approval. I believe that would address Mr. Furneaux's concern about the polarization and the directivity. So
I'll add that. Add the alignment. What was it specifically given?
yeah, I mean, it would need to be that the alignment shall be.
The alignment shall be optimized to minimize the impact upon the affected areas.
Neighboring properties.
Neighboring properties, all right.
Do we have an amended motion?
Yes.
And I'll second the amended motion. Any further discussion?
Just a question.
Commissioner Adams.
You know, I understand the recommendations of the staff, but we just can't see that. We can't see what it's gonna look like. So that's my concern, you know, going forward, is I wish we had a picture of what that would look like. I understand we don't, but it's hard to make a decision when you don't see the whole thing, because we sure don't want to have something where like, that's not what I envisioned, that's not what I thought, and then that's a problem, you know, if we approve something like that.
Does city council approve this?
Typically on a conditional use permit, the Planning and Zoning Commission is the final authority unless it's appealed.
Okay.
Then it goes to the city council.
Commissioner Roberts.
Being new, I am unfamiliar with the correct order of operations, and I'm wondering if because I have a personal relationship with the Furneaux's that I should declare conflict. And I don't know if it's too late to do that, or if I could do that at this point.
I would defer that to our attorney, who is probably cringing at this moment.
So a conflict of interest, have a conflict of interest, it has to be either a proprietary or financial interest. So do you have either one of those? Do you have a conflict of interest? There's also times when you feel like it's inappropriate for you to participate in the discussion because you're too close to the people involved. And that would be kind of avoiding the appearance of impropriety. Not really a conflict of interest, but you're saying, I'm probably just too close to make a decision. So normally you'd want to do that at the beginning of the meeting and not participate in the discussion or not. But I don't think you, unless you tell me you have some kind of financial arrangements with the Furneaux's or a property interest with the Furneaux's, you really don't have a conflict of interest.
Okay. That answers my question.
Thank you.
I was trying to find an easy way out here.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion as presented, then amended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Opposition by Commissioner Bess, otherwise motion passes. Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight and your patience. I hope you all feel that we did listen to everything that was said. Standard disclaimer.
Standard disclaimer. As indicated earlier, there is an appeal period, a 7-day appeal period. If an appeal is received by the city clerk within the next 7 days, this would be forwarded to the city council, who would essentially repeat the process we just went through this evening. If no appeal is received within those 7 days, then this conditional use permit will be considered effective.
Thank you, Director Tregaskis, and we'll move on to call to the public. Is there any member of the community's citizens who would like to address us this evening? Being none, I'll go ahead and skip reading the disclaimer there. And that brings us to item 8, which is approval of minutes from our last meeting held on July 14th, 2020. I have a motion to approve the minutes. A motion by Commissioner Wilson, a second by Commissioner Adams. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes from July 14th, 2020, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that motion passes unanimously. And that takes us to a summary of current events from our commission members. We'll start with Commissioner Wilson.
I would just like to say that I have, there's more and more traffic up here, and I've heard more and more sirens going on. So I spoke with the chief of police regarding that, and he said that because of more traffic, they worked 14 accidents in 1 week. And so I just think that we need to, our citizens need to be more mindful, more conscientious of the other drivers, pay attention, because somebody else might not be, and just, we want to be careful out there right now. The cooler weather is bringing more people up, and I just think that we need to be mindful of, our driving and watch out for others.
Thank you. Commissioner Roberts.
I have nothing to add. At this point, I think it's all. I've been an admirer of how the city's been run over the years, and I'm learning. But I'd like to keep it going the way it's been going.
Welcome to the commission.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bess.
Mask up if you can't keep your social distance.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams.
School's starting in a couple weeks, 2 weeks, something like that. So just remind everyone if there is school or however that's going to work, but there could be buses. So be careful.
Vice Chair.
And welcome to Commissioner Roberts.
Thank you.
And, just be nice. Everybody has sort of dropped into the weird funk that we're in right now. And remember, there are some businesses that still are not able to be open. And so you've got people that are out of work. You've got people that can't go to work that want to. And, whether you mask or you don't mask, please respect other people and just be nice.
Thank you. I just wish everyone good health and hope no one continues to get the COVID virus. So, Director Tregaskis.
Really just would like to comment on the commission itself. At this point, we have a fairly young commission. I mean, I'm looking down at the end, and we've got 3 members that all told between them probably have less than 5 meetings between the 3 of them. The types of questions and the attention to the things at hand are appreciated. Most of our planning and zoning meetings are over in about 15 to 20 minutes. This one is going on an hour and a half, and it's because of the questions and the things that you guys were looking into on this issue. So appreciate the quality of the commission that we have here. That's it.
Thank you. And we've completed our business this evening, so we're adjourned. Thank you.